Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. This interview is being conducted by Stephen Everett, the U.S. Army Center of Military History, at the Veterans of World War I of the United States of America Convention in Oklahoma City, August 25th, 1988. All literary rights belong to the U.S. Army. Access to the interview is open to all. The interview is being conducted with Mr. Leo Burton. Would you mind stating your full name and your date of birth?
Okay. Full name is Leo R.T. Burton. Born July the 20th, 1902. Where do we go from there?
Is there anything in particular you would like to discuss about your service?
Well, except for one thing. I was 14 years old at the time that I joined. The reason that I got in at that early age was because the commandant of the 12th Naval District and my mother were friends, and he allowed me to go into what was called the Leland Stanford University Medical Unit that was to go overseas as a representative of one of the major universities in the United States, the others being University of Chicago, University of Southern Cal, and I believe it was Yale and Harvard back east. These 5 units went overseas as of the winter of 1917 and set up offices and hospitals in Edinburgh, Scotland, Strathpeffer, Scotland, Cardiff, Wales, and 2 in Brest, France. To get into this unit, you have to take a complete nurse's course, take an examination in 17 subjects, and of the 70 that took my particular course, 40 were to be accepted, of which I was number 5. That enabled me to be pharmacist mate in charge of a 13-room suite in the operating room setup, and I served from December, well actually we were delayed by illness in the east, and as of January we took over the whole town of Strathpeffer, Scotland. Our unit was number 2 of the 5 units. Later on, I was transferred to France and served in both hospital units 1 and 5. Returned home somewhere in July of 1919 and resumed my studies at Stanford University, but playing football, I customarily refer to myself as being a bum ever since, because I was injured in that, in the game of football, and spent 2 years in and out of the hospital. Since then, I've been active in the American Legion and later in the World War I veterans, to the extent that I have held and done most everything that is humanly possible for the benefit of the veterans as a whole, particularly those of World War I.
Could you please describe a typical day during your period of service?
Well, we had a number of typical days, but perhaps what would be the most typical was when the hospital trains came in 5 days from the front. To that end, I was loaned for a while to the British service, wore a uniform as a Scotchman from Regiment Sergeant Major, 72nd Division of Seaforth Islanders, to receive those same trains. They had any number of patients aboard, and it was pitiful insofar as a man with a slight wound in the battlefield reaching our hospital 5 days later might result in the loss or amputation of his leg, the whole leg or the whole arm or something of that nature. Services being what they were then, without penicillin or active ingredients that did so much to help later armies, it was impossible to imagine the suffering that our men went through, as I say, with a simple wound ending up in an amputation. A typical day might be that we would get up in the morning at the early hour of 6, have breakfast, go to our assigned duties, work an 8-hour period, then might go to bed, or we might have to, during the night, be called on for another 4 hours. That 4 hours might be at the end of our 8 hours, or the beginning of our 8 hours, or in between our 8 hours, so that we served 12. My old friends, retreads. I'm a retread. Anyway, we really worked. What I mean is, we had 40 men to take care of some 750 patients. We had 60 nurses, 28 doctors, and there were times following the arrival of the hospital trains that we would work 3 days around the clock, passing out as we stood at our respective duties. Mine was in the operating room, and would be revived and go right back on to duty again. And what we were trying to do is save lives, but it was pitiful to see what mustard gas and mushroom bullets and things of that nature did to an ordinary wound. Anyone wounded within the chest or the thoracic cavity just died, period. There was no saving them. For in those days we couldn't get into the cavity. I would say that we had the best nurses, we had the best doctors, and we had the best of facilities, in spite of the fact that when we opened our hospital, one of our 3 ships carrying our materials was sunk by a German submarine. So when we went to open the operating room, we had no instruments. When we went to open the X-ray room, we had no Roentgen ray globes. We couldn't take any X-ray pictures. When we opened everything else in the hospital, there was always something missing that had been on that 3rd ship. However, the mistakes were rectified in due time, and we carried on, and I believe we saved more lives than we lost. And it was a rewarding experience. And then when going to France, after we left Scotland, at the tail end of the war, we followed up and took care of the last patients that unfortunately were wounded either the day of or the day before the armistice was signed. Those were the most pitiful cases that I took care of.
What was the name of your unit again?
It was the Stanford University Medical Hospital Unit Number 2. And as I say, there were 5 of those. Number 5 was in Chicago. Number 1 was down south, and number 3 and 4 were, 4 and 5 rather, were back east. They were all major hospitals under the Navy, under the Naval Reserve, I should say, and roughly they constituted 28 officers, 60 nurses, 40 hospital men, and 60 men to do all the rest of the work in a unit that was on its own.
Did you care primarily for American or British casualties?
I had as many as 17 different nationalities at one time, including some German prisoners. So, and they were among those that would do the most extra duty. Our Americans, I regretfully say, were the laziest. French and the British and the Australians, particularly the Anzacs from Australia, were among the nicest patients that you ever wanted to take care of. And our Americans, I love every one of them, and I enjoy taking care of them, but they could be a pain in the neck at times. They were too, well, they thought they were the best, and maybe we were the best, but I've always conceded that it's nice to be the best, but be no better than someone else, because no matter how good you are, someone else can be better.
What were your opinions of the enemy at the time?
Well, so far as I came in contact with them, only through the fact that they were medical men sent to me, to us for care, they conducted themselves most usefully. They were gracious, they were thankful, appreciative of what they got, And I personally had nothing against the rank and file of the German army. As we all know, it's the officers that make or break an army. As far as the soldiers are concerned, I thought we were all equal. And when left on a one-to-one basis, they were among the best friends I had. I liked every one of them. We had the unfortunate experience of running into a submarine when we were crossing the Atlantic going over, and we were under a blanket of fog and ran on this submarine, who could have shot us, but it had no submarine, it had no torpedoes, and we in turn shot it. Now it was surfacing at the time in the blanket of fog on its way back to Bremerhaven or wherever they had their base up there, and one lieutenant and two of the crew were saved when we sunk the submarine. We had an 8-inch gun forward and a 6-inch gun aft of our ship, which was an American ship, the St. Paul, but had a British crew aboard, except for the gun crews were American. And the reason that, as I say, that they didn't shoot us was that they were out of torpedoes. So we were saved. One of our ships was lost, but I don't think it was that torpedo boat or that submarine that got it. But we took that lieutenant and his two subordinates aboard our ship, and I never met, just on the side because I was only a crew member, but seeing him, he was the cockiest, most, well, I don't know, he was a man that just couldn't see why his submarine had to go down. Anything else?
Were the people that you served with aware of your age?
Yes, I was known as Baby Burton, and I was treated as such even though I held a commanding position as head of the operating room. I had a nurse over me, of course. She in turn had a captain over her. But I had 8 men under me, and I served around the clock on call, although I served hours like everybody else. But I was on call 24 hours a day, and as I say, when hospital trains came in, I worked 3 and 4 days at a time, as did my whole crew. And nurses and men alike would fall down at their station and be replaced by someone else. And that 3 days usually was enough to get through the whole hospital train. And as I say, we were in this little town of Stratton up in the north of Scotland. And we took over the Highland Hotel and the Ben Wyvis Hotel. We took over we took over a few of the outbuildings in this town, which was a spa town where people from all over the world came to drink and bathe and drink the waters. And these men and women were, I would consider, the best that the Army or the Navy had to serve. Mary Halleck over there served with the Army, and through her at one of the California conventions I met one of my nurses who then was still alive. But so far as I know, in my unit I'm the only one left of the 60 nurses, 40 men, the 60 all-around individuals, and the 28 officers. And having served, I went back to school, but as I say, I played football, and that ended that. But by and large, another thing, of the 5 hospitals, we had the best-looking nurses of them all.
What was the morale like in your unit?
What?
What was the morale like in your unit? Was everyone...
Very high. We were all enlisted. There were no draftees among any of the group, and not that that meant anything, but in those days a draftee was somewhat not as high as with regard to World War II, for instance. And a thing that I might say about myself, when I moved to France, I had charge not only of the huge receiving ward, 72 or more patients. But I also signed the release of the men that were either to be sent home or back to duty. And my commandant, who was a Marine colonel, noticed that some of my records seemed to be not just quite kosher. Called me on the carpet and asked me why. And I said, well, my first question to a man was, are you, his name of course, the serial number, and are you drafted or enlisted? Now, if he was drafted, I had a tendency to send him back to duty. If he was enlisted, I had a tendency to send him back home, things being the same. He corrected me and told me I shouldn't show my feelings that way, and I said it was rather small. That was just a minor incident, but it goes on the record that I had that attitude, and I think quite a few others did, but it wasn't quite frowned on like it was in World War II.
The patients that arrived at your hospital, had they received any previous treatment?
No, as I say, they were 5 days from the front, and getting from the front, they went through dressing stations. Then they went, if possible, to a field hospital, and they might come back far enough to go into a base hospital. But as the war ended, particularly in the latter part of 1918, these hospitals all over England, France, were filled. So they sent them on up, way up to us in northern Scotland, past Edinburgh and Cardiff, Wales. And as I say, 5 days had passed. Now sometimes they didn't have hardly a change of a dressing. As I say, in those days, infection being as it was, and having nothing to take care of infection, except what we call the Carroll-Dakin solution, which for your information might be like your wife pouring Clorox on clothing. It smelled like Clorox and acted like Clorox. And to this day, I can't stand Clorox. But it was pitiful to see that a man would have like a bullet wound in the foot, and then we'd have to amputate him here or here because blood poisoning had climbed up in just that period. It only takes 24 hours, much less 48 hours, to have that much infection. It brought tears to your eyes, and not a thing you could do about it. But usually the patients that we got, other than from the hospital trains, were what other British hospitals couldn't take care of. And we had an exaggerated idea of our own importance. We had the finest doctors in the United States among our Stanford unit. Only John Hopkins could perhaps furnish better doctors than we could. And when our doctors gave up on him, there was no hope. But we sometimes kept a man alive for days after he should have been dead. And I guess there was a certain amount of experimentation that went on, and I think that went on throughout all the hospitals. It was an opportunity for a doctor to practice on patients that he would never otherwise see. And it's not regrettable. It was it was really necessary to the medical profession to learn all they could. But sometimes that learning was at the expense of a patient.
Now, within the American casualties that you saw, what was the most typical type of wound? A leg wound or arm?
Well, as I say, anything in the chest was left on the field. After a skirmish of any kind, an advance or a retreat or what have you, men, what we call men from a dressing station, wearing an armband with a red cross on it, would go out, and they had 5 ribbons they'd tie on your arm. I don't recall the sequence and what one was, but black, of course, meant dead. Red was, I'm thinking this is what it was. Red was serious, and blue was he was a casualty that needed assistance, and yellow, he could walk on his own, and white, he just needed attention. I don't know if that was the actual sequence of the colors. Then from there, if he was one of the 4 above, he went back to a to a field hospital. Of course, the dead then were buried either in France or sent home. The serious ones were treated and moved on to a base hospital, and the others were treated locally or at a base hospital and sent back to duty. Those that went to the base hospital that were serious were the ones that got aboard the train and went. And I recall one time there was an inspection by the Queen of the Belgians, and I had a young 14-year-old that rode on my shoulder, and he spoke a number of languages. So as the Queen went through in this hospital, she wondered why only the patients that had leg and arm injuries and head injuries were there. And the little fellow said, I recall very distinctly telling her, anybody that got it here stayed where he got hit. So it was mostly leg and arm, quite a few head injuries.
Now, as a naval hospital unit, did you receive supplies to the Army?
No, Navy furnished everything we had. We took care of all across the board, but all our supplies, everything. We were headed by a captain, a full captain, a commander, 2 lieutenant commanders, and the balance of our 28 officers were first lieutenants, second lieutenants, and 2 or 3 warrant officers. Our nurses were all either first or second lieutenants, and of the 60, we had one more who was a dietitian. She was a first lieutenant. And of our 40 corpsmen, we who were in the first 10 were pharmacist mates first, the second 10 were pharmacist mates second, the third 10 were pharmacist mates third, and the last were hospital apprentices first class.
So you were, other than the original problems that you had after the ship was sunk by the submarine, once you were established, you were well supplied?
Yes, we got our supplies pretty well after the first, after the notation of the first loss, which was rather hard. Our ships should have been loaded more properly. In other words, everything in one thing should have been in one ship. But everything was in a hurry in those days. We'd hurry up and wait. And our ships didn't leave because we, on crossing the country, developed diphtheria and smallpox. And so we were held up from December through February the 1st about before we could take off. And we landed in Philadelphia and took off from New York. And of the men that suffered diphtheria and smallpox, I was one of the 7. One of them died, 2 went crazy, and the other 5 of us, 4 of us, we seemed to get through. I still have a feeling of diphtheria leaves you always with something wrong. And I have a feeling of I can't get into cold water. My neck jams and my back jams. But I guess that's about all.
Where were you born?
Born in San Francisco. And attended school there. And I was in my 2nd year of high school. And ever since Britain had gone into the war in October of 1914, I had wanted to go into the service, but of course that was too much. But as I say, when we entered the war, I couldn't get in fast enough, and I had to wait till my term was out. My mother wouldn't allow me to go before that, but that was May. So came May, I went down, and I was a precocious kid, tall, husky, and acted much older than my years. I sometimes think I was older then than I am now. I'm not a World War I veteran. But I was born to parents that were old. My father was a colonel in the Civil War. My mother was born in 1863 and had the satisfaction of seeing Sherman go through and take the 3 piano. Of course, she didn't remember this. It was hearsay. But when he had his march to the sea, her home was attacked, and they used the 3 pianos for watering troughs for his horses. Of course, the house was pretty much demoralized, too. But she was the wife of a bank owner and a slave owner that had 300 slaves. And that Civil War pretty much upset her. And to her dying days, she was a Southerner from Kentucky.
Do you think your father's Civil War service had an influence on you?
I didn't know my father that well. He suffered a wound in the Battle of Gettysburg, and he didn't live until 1905. He died in the winter of 1905, so I didn't know much about him. But from what my mother said, must have influenced me some. But I was in a house that was torn between two countries, so to speak, because she was a Southerner to the day she died. And I know my father was a Northerner, pure and simple.
Do you know what unit he served with?
No, I don't. He retired from the Army after the Civil War with the rank of general, but I don't know anything about it. I should know, but I don't know. I'm not a man that worries much about his family. I'm not a genealogist, and we had a slogan that was on our coat of arms in England. It said, "Every tub stands on its own bottom, but it stands a damn sight longer if it's made out of good wood." That sufficed for me.
What impact do you think your military service had on your life?
Well, it made me a flag waver from the start, which I was originally, and I've been very strong ever since in fighting for veterans' affairs. We in the American Legion fought for all the veterans' affairs, all the veterans' benefits that we now have, hospitals, the VA, and so forth. I was right in the middle of all of that. I fought for and worked hard for those things, and I'm proud of my activity. 70 years, 71 now, in the American Legion. I've held almost all the jobs except a department commander. I've been a department adjutant and a department vice commander, and I've been the head of the 40 and 8, which is the Honor Society. I'm 4 times a past commander of a local post, including my own in Eugene, Oregon now. The others were in Honolulu. And one can say that I am a veteran from the word go, flag waver from the word go. And I've worked for membership all the time. No matter what other jobs I had, membership came first. Other than that, I think it had an impact, made me a better American, if that's possible. And nothing suits me better than to salute the flag and listen to taps.
This is an interview with Leo Burton that's continued from side 1. What do you recall about November 11, 1918? How did you react about hearing about the armistice?
Well, November 11, 1918, I was in the north of Scotland with a room full of patients, 72 to be exact, all of them on their back, seriously wounded one way or another, all bedridden, equally divided between British and Americans, with 1 or 2 Indians, not our Indians, but India. And a battle ensued. They couldn't get up, but a verbal battle like you've never heard. The Americans and the British never got along officially. And this was our Americans yelling, "We won the war because we did it, not because you did it." And the most terrific accident that happened that night was one of the British sailors took a cane. He could go to the restroom, that's all he could do. But his arm was all shattered. But he took his cane and threw it across the room, which was as big as this, having 72 beds in it. It was longer, but not as wide. The beds flanked each other. He was over here, and the American was over there. The cane went across the room, went along like that, and went right into his eye. The eye popped out, went across the room, and all hell broke loose. And I was all alone trying to calm 72 people. The armistice was a nightmare for me. And not only did it hurt my feelings, but this man whose eye was knocked out, he was one of our first patients in the hospital, and 2 ships, 2 minesweepers had come together, and in a heavy tide, which is up in the north of Scotland, the one had come over and hit one of the mines on this one and blown the whole top of the ship to hell. And he was a wireless operator, and while he was sitting in the wireless room, the shrapnel comes through the room and took his testicles, but his pecker was here, and left that, put a big hole on one side or the other, I forget which, and then it also took his arm off here. So he was really in a bad way. And then to lose his eye on top of it, from a man that we called a lead swinger, which was a man that had only a really bad damaged arm, but he would take his arm and break it, and it was showing signs of recovery, so he would stay in the hospital. So that was a nightmare for me. Other than that, I don't think there was any real activity. We were all stunned by the end of the war. It was so sudden, but that's the way it happened.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, except that I wouldn't do it over again, but I'm happy as all get out for having gone through this. I'm happy for the activities and the work that it has given me, which you would call a hobby, and it's being gratified as exemplified in this book, and by the few jobs that I've had, from regional commander all the way down to a member of the barracks. And I can thank the Legion for the same thing. And I'm also a life member of the VFW, I'm a life member of the Legion, a life member of this. And I'm a hobbyist by heart, and my hobbies develop around some of the things having to do with the war, and the things that were during the war. I collect lots of that material. I still have my uniforms. I'm still very happy to be a veteran, and I'm happy to be here. And I can thank you for this interview.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.